Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Rocket Lab Weekly on a kind of weird time because Europe hasn't changed time yet. And as far as I understand, the US has changed into summertime, but I don't know what other countries have. So, depending on where you are, we might be off plus minus 1 hour. I think it's going to be like this for the next few weeks until we also change. Yeah, so let me know actually in the comments from where are you watching and have you changed the time yet? It's just an interesting thing to know. And as for Rocket Lab and the space industry, there has been a lot of things happening this week. There has been a Japanese rocket that blew up on launch. We had our own Owl Night long launch. Starship Demo 3 launched, and there has been quite a very interesting analysis that I want to take up with you by Elon Musk. And he said that in a few years they will have almost 99% share of mass to orbit. And if that's true, and what that means for Rocket Lab, and there is some other additional topics that I prepared, which Twitter logged me out of. So if I remember them, we will look into them. But one very important is that despite very good execution, the stock is near all-time lows, or near, but yeah, it's getting close to all-time lows. And the S&P 500 seems to be going through a pullback. So I also want to touch a little bit what we can expect if the market goes into a pullback. So it's going to be an awesome show. We have our co-host Matt Money here. How was your week, my friend?
Good week, man. Good week. I told you I got my annual cash bonus for the year, so that was nice. And then I also got I think I told you I was looking to apply for 2 roles within UDoc. So one of which extended, and that would be a promotion for me, which is nice. And then the other one I still haven't heard back from, but it looks like I'll probably end up taking the one versus the other. So it's nice. It's a nice little step up. It might mean a little bit more travel. So that's fun. But otherwise than that, the market's been interesting. Bitcoin's obviously been doing rather well and up until the last 24 hours. So it's been a lot of fun at Matty Capital. Just continue to move and ebb and flow with the market as we always do. So can't complain. But I did want to also say I was actually surprised because I grew up with daylight savings in Pennsylvania before I moved to Texas, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess 2019 to 2020, I actually lived in Trinidad and Tobago, which is basically on the equator. And a lot of places that are on the equator don't actually have daylight savings. So I was actually surprised because like that, when you're kind of trying to relate back to where your friends and family are, it's like, well, sometimes you can be plus an hour, sometimes you can be behind an hour. So it's pretty interesting in that respect. So apologies if anybody was confused. We're here as always due to Vince's great efforts in getting us prepped every week.
Thank you for the kind words. I was actually very surprised to see that Bitcoin is quite a large holding in your portfolio. And is it because you bought so early, or you went quite heavy in it?
I don't think it. Well, I guess it depends on what's a lot. I mean, I have about a Bitcoin, and then I have some other crypto, but I think it's. Let me see. Of my individual portfolios, which I can invest in, so not including retirement accounts, it's like 7%.
Okay.
So it's not that big. So I guess I have a little bit more than a Bitcoin's worth of total crypto, but I have about a total 1 Bitcoin. If you're looking specifically at Bitcoin, I mean, I bought. When did I start buying? I mean, I've been in and out of Ethereum and stuff like that. I started mining back in like 2017, 2018 when it started going up. And then, so that was a lot of fun. We sold that. So we still had all the Ethereum from that, but we used the money, and I don't know what I put the money into back then. I wish I'd bought more Ethereum. And then, during the 2019-2020 timeframe, I bought more Bitcoin. And then I just would continuously buy $50 every couple weeks of Bitcoin and some Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, and the rest is kind of history. It just so my main, I think, portfolio of where I bought Bitcoin, it was up, at least when I checked, when it was up at it's 73,000, it was up 450%, but now it's probably
Wow.
pulled back a little bit. So yeah, I have a small amount of actual cost basis in Bitcoin, but I think it's just because I've held on to it for a little bit. Now I'm only up 410% on some of the original.
That's pretty good.
Um,
We have an investor in one of our projects who bought 2 Bitcoins for I think it was 10 cents or no, sorry, $1 each for 2 Bitcoins, and he still has them today.
Good
That's
for him.
yeah, good for him. That's pretty
That's
good.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool. So Rocket Lab, let's go over the week. So we had a launch that we unfortunately didn't get to live stream. Okay, one sec. Why am I not able to? Here we go. But I managed to watch from the background. Did you see the launch?
Yeah, I was in between meetings, and it was actually pretty funny. I was in the middle of a meeting with like a group of like 4 or 5 other people, and they were all chatting amongst themselves, and I was just looking at my laptop, and they were like, "What are you looking at?" I just like turned it, and they were like, "Ah, okay, got it."
They all think it was like 18 plus stuff. I don't want to say the
Yeah,
word.
who knows what they thought it was, but it was rocket stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. So, I mean, for me, it's very interesting because I have been, you're obviously you're following this company for a lot longer, but this launch, I felt like, it's just, they have done so many of these, it's going to go flawlessly. And I get this SpaceX vibes, a little bit when you like almost don't want to watch the launch of the Falcon 9s. Of course, the Starship you still want to launch because you're like, it's the same thing. They always manage. And yeah. Do you also get similar?
Well, I think the thing that I recognize, so kind of leaning on that a little bit, but diving a little bit deeper, a lot of these people now are return customers, which I think is really fun because if you think about it, they've now realized, okay, this company is competent, they know what they're doing, and here we are back for a second, third, or I think this one was actually the 3rd launch, Force Inspective, the first time
I
from
think
the
fourth.
U.S. No, was it
I
the
think
4th?
fourth.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the first several were from New Zealand. So yeah, it's nice that we have these return customers, and we're going to continue to see that throughout the year, right? We're going to have the NRO, which is I think the one that's coming up for number 46. So we've launched a lot for them. Black Sky is a repeat customer, so it's fun now that you're seeing this increased cadence. You're like, oh, you're starting to recognize all these other players that are truly vital, and it's almost, if you think about it, kind of an entire ecosystem that you want to continue to succeed. Because all these companies will help, provide revenue for Rocket Lab in the long term, right? So, I think a lot of times people think it's a very like competitive space, but in reality, we're all just trying to accomplish somewhat of the same thing. So I think it's a lot of fun. So hopefully we continue to have Synspective and NRO and all these other companies continue to survive for the long term, and likely see them in missions launched later this year, if not next.
Yeah. And then the next very interesting thing that has happened is Starship launch. This one I also watched live. I don't know if you managed. Insane views. I mean, this view of the Starship coming in with the hot air plasma coming back. As far as I understand, it did end up burning up in the atmosphere.
Oh, the whole rocket did?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's crazy. It's the first time I understood that. You see the Falcon 9 like land all the time, and then you have this little speed thing on both the like on this launch you had the speed on the first stage and the second stage, but on the Falcon 9 launches I think you maybe there you also have the two, but the point is that the booster that takes the Falcon 9 up, when it separates, it's going at maybe like 6,000 kilometers per hour or something like this, and then it comes back and lands. And the top of Starship, it was going like 26,000 kilometers per hour when when they wanted to like have it and re-enter the atmosphere, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's like 5x the speed. And the thing is that, you know, like the energy to get up to that speed is like exponential. It's not linear, it's exponential. And then you have to lose that energy. And I was like, wow, I kind of understand why this has not been done. And I saw in a lot of tweets that it's even like it's not fully proven out yet if they will be able to recover the Starship. Like it's a huge cornerstone of SpaceX plans that they will be able to recover it and rapidly reuse it. But as it was pointed out by a lot of physics tweets, it's really not proven at this point that that's even physically possible. And the ship didn't, like, they couldn't basically hold it so that the belly was down all the time. So it was like turning, and then I guess the ship got damaged and it just burned up in the atmosphere. So
I was watching until the so I didn't. It's cool that we got the pictures because I watched the initial launch and then I had to get ready for work. This is specifically for SpaceX launch that happened. Was that Thursday? Yeah. So was going there to the office. By the time I got to the office, opened up my laptop. I had seen that they only had the Starship up, not the actual booster. And so I was looked back and I didn't see the plasma piece that we have now. So I'm really happy I saw these pictures yesterday, or was it earlier this morning? I don't remember, but I didn't. All I saw, I went back on the YouTube's link that they had, and I just saw that the booster footage just cut out, and I was like, it either hit the water full speed or it burned up. So I just assumed it hit the water, but I guess as you're kind of alluding to it burned up. So it was really cool, but I haven't heard that until just now that they don't think there's a possibility of them being able to capture the booster. I just always assumed that you'd be able to grab it. I know Starship has been able to land itself, I think, but yeah, the booster might be a different story. So I'm curious to see. I was actually thinking about that as well. I was like, would they land that? Because it's such a big vessel comparatively to the Falcon 9 rocket, right? Like the booster on the Falcon 9, you can land on one of those drone ships, but it's like, what are you supposed to do with this big booster? Is it going to do what they do for, say, Rocket Lab Electron, or are they going to capture it and then try to like refurbish it? Or I know eventually they plan to capture it in the test stand, but I guess for the first few launches and recoveries, like I don't know what they're going to do to be able to test that at first.
Yeah, so the rocket is, like, many people think it's like reusable from the get-go. Like, you know, when Elon Musk, like I see a lot of Rocket Lab, no, not a lot Rocket Lab investors, but people who don't invest into Rocket Lab because of SpaceX, because Starship is around the corner, and then they think that the minute they have a successful launch, it will be sold for like 2 million per launch. And I think it will take a lot of iterations until it's even just reusable and lands. I mean, like the Falcon 9 was like 17 tries or something to
it was a lot,
to get it to land, right? And this one, again, the booster is insanely big, as you said. And I think that the first few tries, even if they land it on a drone ship and then they waste it in the ocean, because I think that they're just mining the data from it, you know, like what's the, you know, how is this the structure reacting, what is the pressures, what is in the tanks, you know, what is the limits of the machine. So I wouldn't even be surprised if they don't reuse some of the first ones that come back. And yeah, and the Starship itself, the one that goes out to space and comes back, I mean, that's, I never realized how insanely hard it was to land that one. So yeah, I want to show you something. Again, there's a lot of people who hold out on investing in Rocket Lab because of SpaceX's Starship. And there was a really interesting Elon Musk comment to this tweet. So SpaceX has only been around for 22 years. This Ashley Vance is, by the way, the guy who wrote the book When the Heavens Went for Sale. I highly recommend for anyone who wants to invest into Rocket Lab to read that book. And he actually wrote one of the first biographies of Elon Musk. So SpaceX has only been around for 22 years and is doing laps on well the entire world. Europe and Russia have largely done nothing in the last 2 decades to address the competition. SpaceX just put a rocket into orbit today that will extend its lead dramatically, while just about everywhere else is trying badly to catch up to the SpaceX of 2018. The US and China will dominate space for many years to come, maybe permanently. And then he posts a chart of spacecraft up mass carried by launch provider. And you can see that this one is SpaceX and Rocket Lab is this one here. So SpaceX did, no, sorry, I read it wrong. So this 382,000, is it million kilograms? SpaceX launched about 382,060 kilogram of spacecrafts, and then they have to basically zoom in on the last ones. And yeah, this is Rocket Lab, but can it be that Rocket Lab delivered 100 kilograms? No, this, in Q4.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then it makes sense. So you can see that the difference between Rocket Lab and SpaceX is like 3-4 orders of magnitude. And then Elon Musk, my Twitter, I'm sorry, guys, I apologize. Here it is.
Okay.
So if things go well, SpaceX will put about 50% more tonnage in orbit this year using Falcon, which would be above 90% market share. Once Starship is in full swing building a city on Mars, it will do 99% of all payload to orbit and beyond, as the objective requires about a megaton to Earth orbit per year. Unless other organizations aim for making life multiplanetary, their payload to orbit will necessarily be in the noise, as there isn't enough to do just launching satellites. So this is a very interesting comment by bossman Elon Musk. And what do you think about this in terms of Rocket Lab and the future for Rocket Lab? And yeah.
I mean, I don't disagree with it. Obviously, he has a lot more experience than I do and knows a little bit more about the industry than I do for certain. Obviously, I'm not. I'm just a hobbyist, if that makes sense, in the stock arena for it. But I think that doesn't necessarily mean that Rocket Lab will be unnecessary. And as we've also seen from a defense perspective, from Space Force, as well as the Air Force, as well as Department of Defense, there's a lot of budget to go around that Rocket Lab can assist with in that respect. And I think we're going to see more now that the world is becoming deglobalized, as we have observed over the past 2 years. I think companies like Rocket Lab that can provide assistance and not necessarily focus on multiplanetary when we're having our own issues on our own planet. That there's a lot of funds in space systems that need to be had within there. So while he might not necessarily be wrong in terms of the magnitude of volume and things going to space, there's still a lot that needs to be done. In the next 10 years, we'll need to put a new International Space Station up there. We'll need to continue to be leaders within the space defense space, with Space Force being a huge proponent of that. I'm assuming HASTE will continue to be a huge portion of future revenue for Rocket Lab. So, I think that regardless, there's always going to be satellites that are falling back to Earth and coming out of orbit as well. So you'll have to replace those. So I think there could be something there as well that people are overlooking. And I'm just kind of thinking this up off the fly. But if Elon's not necessarily caring so much about satellites and space systems like he is right now, and obviously that means Starlink and some of the other things that he's helping launch, and he's really only focused on multiplanetary, that obviously opens up the number one player for space systems specifically aimed around Earth. And that could be meaning that SpaceX ends up becoming so big and ends up focusing so much on multiplanetary that when it comes to Earth observation and Earth specific satellites, then there's a number one player spot that's technically open for that. And so as Rocket Lab can kind of fill that void and SpaceX kind of leaves and focus specifically on Mars and stuff of the like, that's always been something that's in the back of my mind is, who will be the number one provider for Earth specifically if it's not going to be SpaceX. And I think that that's probably going to be either someone in China or Rocket Lab. And obviously, if you have this multi-nation sort of standoff as we're kind of starting to have with deglobalization, and these are words of my own specifically, not anybody else's, just to cover my butt there, you'll need multiple places that are specifically aiming towards, Earth, Western focus sort of launches and other nation sort of launches, whether that's sort of the BRICS nations or what have you. You'll need to differentiate between the two because obviously at the moment there's no alliances for space when it comes to, say, India in the US or China in the US or Russia in the US, as there have been in the past. So a lot of verbiage there, but hopefully it made sense and I wasn't just talking nonsense.
Yeah. I also think I watched a podcast where they said that Starship is going to open new possibilities in space, like nothing that we have seen, and it will attract a lot of like secondary and tertiary needs that will have to be covered in space. And for example, there is actually a startup that is by a SpaceX engineer who designed, I believe, the Merlin engines. I just forget the name of that company. And they are a space tugging company that moves like satellites in between orbits. And their thesis is that, Starship is going to happen and it will take like a crap ton of things into orbit. And if, they fill it up with full of satellites and then, it goes up, then those things need to go into the correct orbits. And I just can't remember the name of this company. I don't know why it slipped my, like you guys in the comment section can help me out. And, like, for example, the Starship would make it possible for multiple space stations to exist. But then the servicing of those space stations, like maybe we will have space hotels or maybe, there will be different space laboratories. But then servicing and, like taking up the food, bringing down the trash and all these things, the Starship is just way too big for that. And all of those are going to be, all of these demands will be filled by smaller companies like Rocket Lab. So I think that all in all, Starship success is going to be very, very bullish for other companies. And yes, SpaceX is probably going to be the number one. Not probably, I mean, yeah, like I guess it's not for sure, so you have to say probably, but 99% they are going to be the number one. But I think there's going to be a lot of room for number two, number three.
Yeah, I mean,
on the list.
Prime example, right? I mean, when you look at some of these companies like Black Sky, Synspective, etc., they're a couple $100 million companies. For them to be able to outlay, let's say, even $50 million to get on a Falcon 9 launch is just uncomprehensible. So you need to have an entry point that is a fraction of that, which is Electron or something else that allows you. Now, there is the rideshare piece that SpaceX is working on, and so that might allow to have multiple, folks having, on the transporter piece. But at the same time, it's like, you need to break it up into smaller pieces. Now, if you look at a, say, Starship launch, that's probably going to be north of what is that? 9 figures, $100 million. So it's going to be north likely, probably closer to 150 million. So at least in the beginning, maybe once it gets, to the place of reusability, if that's even possible, it'll bring it down. But, that's larger than market cap of most companies. We're talking about the top companies in the world when we talk about the stock market. But when you think about most companies that are really trying to do things, they don't have 9-figure budgets. And I think it's easy to get lost a little bit when we talk about trillion-dollar budgets with the U.S. government, or billion-dollar budgets when it comes to SpaceX, or $100 million budgets when it comes to Rocket Lab. But a lot of companies are not in that space. And so there's not going to be a, let's say, a complete obsolete marketplace when it comes to Starship. And I think when it comes to Starship as well, they're going to be focused on multi-planetary. So are they really going to be focusing on all these $1-2 million launch tickets and trying to fill up, let's just say, 70 different customers to be able to get one Starship off, right? Like they're focusing on, like they stated, the amount of tonnage that you need to go and be habitable upon Mars or other planets. So will they really have the time to deal with the logistics of all these individual customers when that could be the crumbs that Rocket Lab or Firefly or some of these other people pick up as they kind of progress and mature into that space? And I think that's more likely than but that's literally speculation, right? And so
I mean, we're going to we have to see. I just think that Starship is going to bring a lot of changes, and it will open the space industry like it has never been opened before. And I think that there's going to be a lot of new things happening in space that we have not seen before. And I'm very sure that there will be secondary and tertiary consequences of that, where other companies can live very, very nicely. Because, as you said, like even on a rideshare mission to weight 100, and I mean, they can probably fit 150, 200 satellites, and Rocket Lab is having trouble like with one satellite per rocket, having the customer come in on time and not having any delays, and like waiting for 200 different companies to assemble their satellites. And also for those companies, like, if there's a delay, like then they have to wait, and so I'm sure that there's going to be I
was going to say also, I mean, the way I've been talking about it is really focused on the launch piece, but you think about all the different trackers and solar panels and all these different components that Rocket Lab is going to be able to supply to the market. That's if they are really launching that much, SpaceX meaning launching that much, and they are going to be using so much satellite components or not satellite, well, I guess all satellite components and solar components, then I mean that's only good for Rocket Lab as they are a huge space systems maker, right? So I think I haven't seen the stat for 2023, but it was in 2022, the magnitude, I think, of all, I think it was like 40% of all launches had a Rocket Lab logo somewhere within it, right? Whether it was a Rocket Lab launch, or whether it was a Rocket Lab, space component, or whether it was a Rocket Lab satellite, but there was a Rocket Lab logo that went to space on 40-something% of the launches in 2022. And I don't know what the number was for 2023, but even if you were to say extrapolate that, I'm not saying that it's going to stay 40%, but even if you were to say it gets 10% in SpaceX's launching up, that means that of all that tonnage, 99%, then that means you still have a large percentage of market share of all of the space components that are going up into space that have a Rocket Lab logo on it. And that means that as SpaceX succeeds, Rocket Lab will succeed.
Awesome. By the way, the chat has been really, really good, because they pointed out the fact that the government would never let SpaceX become a monopoly in space. So that's something that is good for Rocket Lab. And they also pointed out, which we didn't talk about because I guess we know that it's true, we talk about it so much, but only 30% of Rocket Lab's income is from launching rockets, and they are like a 66% space systems company. So they get a mega benefit from you actually spoke about it, but it was first pointed out in the chat. So that's amazing work, guys. So next one, I realize now I didn't know which tabs I lost because Twitter thought I was a bot and I had to verify that I'm a human. And then all the tabs that I opened got lost. But this week there was a launch of a Japanese rocket, which is a private rocket. I guess it's done by a startup, and the rocket went up, and like after 10 minutes it just blew up. I don't know if you saw that launch.
10 seconds.
Yeah. Did you see that launch?
Yeah.
So basically space is very hard, and I guess
space is tough.
Yeah, they will try again. And other news is there was a new space company that basically became adjusted EBITDA positive for this year, and that company is Redwire. How much do you know about this company?
Not much other than reading through their earnings report for 3Q, and I don't know if I had the opportunity to look through the fourth quarter or not. I don't know when it came out, but I saw that Uncle Dave had posted something about it. But yeah, they were on track last time I checked to be EBITDA positive. So if this is the most recent earnings report, I'm not surprised that they are.
Yeah. And the reason why I was thinking that this is interesting is because I feel that there is a very negative sentiment on space companies, and then somehow the more companies that achieve, adjusted EBITDA profitability and then GAAP profitability, I think it increases the sentiment in the whole space sector. At least that's my logic. So last week it was Spire Global that said that they would become. Were they free? I don't remember now if they were free cash flow positive, and they will be adjusted EBITDA positive very soon. I think that's what they said. And now this company, and I think it's just very interesting to compare this to Rocket Lab and how Rocket Lab is standing. My understanding is that this company is more like a space systems. They manufacture satellite components, not even satellites, and they have some defense contracts. Do you have a better way of explaining what they do?
No, I don't know much. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. I think they're a component maker, right? I don't think they make whole satellites, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
One thing that we know is that I don't think that they are the acquisition target for Rocket Lab, because they are on the public market. And when Rocket Lab was asked, they said that like on the private markets, the valuations start to look good. So that to me, it communicates that they're looking at something that is not publicly traded. So this is not, I believe, the target of Rocket Lab's acquisition effort.
Yep.
One thing
I think I want to say, I think the reason why Redwire has been so successful over the past 6 months or so is I think that they had a strategic acquisition that they had middle of last year, and I think with economies of scale, you're able to kind of get more revenue through the door, and especially if you're looking at kind of gross profit at that point, you don't necessarily need to double the headcount, right? So once you get to economies of scale, which is what we'll observe with Rocket Lab going into next year, is you are able to accomplish more as you automate, as you make things more efficient, as you kind of get the underlying operating expenditures kind of just underway. You're able to achieve more and more revenue and squeeze more and more out of the employees. Not like you're trying to wring them out of a towel, but I think as they get more mature and in terms of an organization, they're able to learn more and accomplish more and succeed. You have a lot less failure, right? And so, with that, I think Redwire was able to acquire a company last year, and with that, they were able to boost their revenue pretty significantly from that. And I think that's where they were able to cross that threshold and eventually become positive when it comes to cash flow.
Yeah. And for those of you in the audience, if you're wondering if this is a company that is a buy, I mean, I was going through the numbers that they had, and you know, every company has a different definition of what adjusted EBITDA is. I was quite surprised on this one because normally, to me, what I'm used to is that the adjusted EBITDA is basically the stock-based compensation backed out of the GAAP net earnings. And here they, like, you can see that they had minus 27 million in GAAP earnings, and then to make it a positive EBITDA, they back out the net interest expense. I mean, I understand the logic that if you had the capital and the business is producing operational income, then the interest expense would not be there. So it's like, but I don't know, it feels weird to back that out. And then the depreciation amortization, okay, that I understand. And then there is, you know, like capital market and advisory fees, litigation related fees, equity based. Yeah, so there is the equity based compensation and this amortization. Like these two is the one that I'm used to for adjusted EBITDA. And this interest expense and, you know, advisory fees and you know, warrant liability, fair value adjustment, I feel it's pretty, how do you call it? Like it's a very financially engineered way of becoming adjusted EBITDA positive.
Well, I mean, the just an education piece for some folks. I mean, the interest expense piece, I mean, that's what the I stands for in EBITDA, in earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization.
Yeah.
So the interest expense is always kind of removed. And the reason why people look at EBITDA is really, it's just before you start tacking on, it's really just a measurement of, hey, what is your, say, your gross profit and what is it to operate, right? And then you get into the fact of, you go from gross profit, which is basically your revenue minus your cost of goods sold, and then you do the EBITDA piece, which is your operating profit, which incorporates your kind of sales and general and administrative sort of costs, SG&A, as most people call it, and then you get to the point where you have net margin, which is basically incorporating interest and depreciation and all these other things. So anyway, just wanted to, for those folks that might not necessarily.
I see what you're saying. So in a very nice way, you said that I said something stupid with this net interest income, and I can see that. Okay, so
no,
I take
you
it.
did a great job.
Anyway, so but this company is at the cusp of you know, being cash flow positive, and that's very, very nice. And then I just wanted to see, like, okay, if this company would have a, you know, very high price to sales, then, you know, like it would warrant that Rocket Lab should also have a very high price to sales, but their price to sales is 0.89, which is crazy low. And yeah, so it's not really good to compare Rocket Lab to this one. And I guess I also understand that Rocket Lab could very easily disrupt them because they have the keys to space, and, you know, they can also manufacture satellites, so they are much easily able to disrupt them, so to say. So I understand that they have a risk premium. This is their stock price over the time. Unfortunately, it's a similar graph to Rocket Lab, even similar dollar amount. Pretty crazy. And I want to use this to segue into Rocket Lab. Let me see if I can go to it, because we are close to all-time lows. And I must say that this week, you know, I think, you can tell me, Matt, if I'm wrong, but I think that every investor, regardless of their experience, regardless of their conviction, when the price goes against you, it's not very nice, and you get doubts. Like, at least I get doubts, and I have to revisit my thesis all the time, and, you know, calm myself down. And I am someone who fights with their emotions, but I'm like very good at overcoming them in the end. But this week I actually had to sit down, and I'm like, am I missing something? Is the market, you know, like, I'm so bullish on this company, and I'm like, how can we be, like, to me, we're at insane low levels, right? And then I got this thought that, you know, you look at the S&P 500, and you can't say that we are at a low level, right? Like if I would ask you that you have to choose, like, is the market going to continue to rally or is there going to be a pullback? I mean, this is where we are. You would say that, yeah, a pullback should come because we just had a rally since, what is it, November. We went almost straight up to March, like a 5-month rally. And logically, if the market pulls back, then, you know, our beloved Rocket Lab should also pull back. But I'm like, to what point? And I'm curious, what do you think? What do you think about the current valuation? How is your emotions? I mean, you're holding Rocket Lab through thick and thin since the de-SPAC. So I actually really look up to you for that. But want to hear your viewpoints.
I mean, I've been humbled before, you know, and I've been in the trenches before. I think this is just a key thing of when you think about what a SPAC company is. And I think, you know, Redwire might have got caught up in this. A lot of companies get caught up in this. You have this private investment that goes in, right? So when we talk about specifically Rocket Lab, what's happened? You know, Vector Acquisition Group came in. They said, let's give this company $900 or so million to help fund operations, fund themselves to get to, you know, a few acquisitions, which they spent $400 million on all these acquisitions in 2021, early 2022. And then that remaining $450 million in cash that they had from the de-SPAC went into the Neutron piece and just normal operating expenditures. But taking a step back, you know, since that point, when you had a company like this, it basically was valued at, say, circa $5 billion. That's what that pipe was, you know, basically evaluating the company as. I still think that that valuation is real. I still think that that's not anything to be scoffed at, but people were able to get so much acquisition of the company at such a cheap price that even though the market valuation of the company went from, say, circa $5 billion down to $2.5 billion, they're able to sell these shares and still make a handsome profit because they were able to basically get into it as a private company. Very often, and people that are in M&A and do a lot of these deals, very often, a lot of these companies don't trade for much more than, say, a couple years worth of earnings. Now, when you have these sort of companies, it's a little bit more difficult because there's not earnings, but say a private company was making $1 million. You'd be very hard pressed to sell that to somebody else for, say, $3 million because you have to think of all the risks and everything associated with it. Now, when you have sort of a public company, it's been established enough where, but anyway, so what I'm saying is basically you have these people that are having such cheap shares that they can sell out at even at $4.20 and still make a profit.
I'm curious, like, so when you say these people, it's the early hedge funds, it's SPIs and back, I guess, and employees, or because I'm wondering, like, how much of these do we have left?
I mean, that's part of it, but you have to think what specifically is a SPAC. A SPAC is basically a blank check company, and while they might value the company, let's just say, and I don't remember the numbers, and it's probably a good exercise for me to go ahead and do, they're providing $900 million worth of capital, right, back in, you know, the early 2021 timeframe, and for that they got a large portion of the company. And while that valued the company at, say, $5 billion or so, basically the value that they were able to get these shares at might have been equivalent to them being able to purchase at a percentage point of, say, 500 million or $1 billion. Yeah. So they're still up massively on that investment, you know. And I'm not this is the SPAC piece, right? I'm not talking about the people that have been on since 2006 and helping feed along Rocket Lab since then. And so these guys, whether they have other ideas as to what they want to do, or whether they're just taking their money and running or diversifying, etc., you know, there's that piece. But I also believe that there's just ultimate skepticism of, you know, people not believing in companies like Rocket Lab that are in the space systems space. I think it's historically been in an area where we've now seen Astra have to go private in order to continue operations. We've seen Virgin Orbit go private. Virgin Galactic is, having massive hemorrhaging of cash problems. So other than these shining stars that are kind of coming through, like your Redwire that are just starting to get positive, you also even have, say, SpaceX, which they might have a quarter here or there of profitability, but are they truly, profitable consistently? And I guess the answer is we don't know. We don't have the books, right? If they were so profitable, why would they continue to go to the market for funding, right? I mean, they keep getting capital raises that value the company at 80 billion, 100 billion, 150. Now they're up to close to 200 billion. If they didn't, if they were so profitable as an organization, why would they continue to go to the market for capital raises, right? And if it was that cheap and they weren't hemorrhaging that much cash, why would Elon, not just bankroll it himself, right? So if you think about it in this perspective, I'm sure other people are observing that. You have the number one launcher within the United States continually going to the market for cash because they're burning cash. Rocket Lab, who's the number two launcher, hasn't necessarily broken even yet in terms of being able to be, I mean, their gross profit and their EBITDA positive, but when it comes to cash flow, they're not there yet, right? And then if you look at ULA, they haven't had a successful go of it. So I think you still have this resistance of, hey, you don't have any profitable launch or many profitable space systems companies other than a select few, and the majority of them go bankrupt. So I think you have two big things at play, which is a lot of people with a lot of cheap shares so they could sell even today at a profit, and then two, you're in a very historically unprofitable business.
Okay. And to answer the question of like what happens if the S&P 500 goes into a pullback, we're in a very weird market. I was looking at it the other day, and there are I feel like the market is divided still in two, and then you have the Nvidias, the Palantirs, that have had an amazing time, but then there's a lot of companies that, I mean, like Tesla is down minus 30%, Google is not really going anywhere, Rocket Lab is not going anywhere, so it's like historically what I have seen is, the whole market moves together, and if you have like a major bull cycle, then every stock is up. It's just, or most of them is up, but it's just a question of how much. And now it feels like there is a few sector that carries the market, and then the rest of the market is barely doing anything. So logically there should be a pullback, but for example, is there room for Rocket Lab to pull back? Do you think it's could we see the stock in the 360s if the S&P 500 has a 15% pullback, despite the fact of that there is plenty of capital in the company? They are a space prime now. We have the 500 million contract. What do you or can it be a situation where we start going against the market, that the S&P 500 is pulling back and we are staying the same or going higher?
Yeah, I think there's still some fear, I think, of dilution, and until we get past that point, I think people will be fearful. And what I mean by that is I still don't think people are 100% comfortable with these convertible debt offerings that they've been offering, and I think I could easily see this into the 350 range. That wouldn't surprise me at all, especially if say there's another failed launch or something like that. Knock on wood. But the thought to me is anything's possible, I think, until you get to EBITDA, kind of break even, or sorry, cash flow break even, and you actually start generating a cash build within the organization. So I think, to me, this has always been something I think this is very binary for me. I look at this as a very binary investment. It's either I end up crashing and burning, which I've done before. And, I lose, let's say 50, 60 grand, which in the grand scheme of things isn't the end of the world. But it would have been nice to, maybe pay down the mortgage a little bit better than maybe lose it. But to me, it's very binary. It's either this thing's going to crash and burn, I'm going to lose 60 grand, or this thing's going to be a $500,000 to $1 million investment within the next 10 years. And so to me, it's like you're betting on a show pony, and show ponies, sometimes they break their leg. And that could also be the case here. But I think in the short term, people can bet against it. People can bet against the industry, but it's inevitable and it's consolidating. And I think if anybody's capitalized well enough, it's Rocket Lab, it's SpaceX. And I think the moat that Rocket Lab is building around themselves with respect to all the different components that they're able to bring to market and sell to market, and as well as the operating systems piece, because people can launch their own satellites, but do they have an operating, like for example, I forget the most recent, but I think it was a SpaceX launched vehicle that Rocket Lab had made or put components at least into, and they're operating it out of Denver, right? Rocket Lab is operating it. So it's like, no matter what, there's always going to be an avenue for Rocket Lab to win, right? They might not have launched the vehicle. They might not have made the entire vehicle that they launched into space. They might have put a couple pieces into it, but they're operating it, right? And so you've seen that now with the amount of revenue streams that Rocket Lab is able to bring to market. We saw that with Varda. We saw that with a lot of different avenues. So I think, let the price go down to $3.50. I'll probably buy a couple thousand more shares. To me, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And it always has been that way. It was the same way with Palantir. And eventually the same people, people are very, how do I say, sheepish, if this makes sense. They like to follow the herd, and they like to follow the pack. Just like everyone was piling in on Google, a couple of weeks ago. But yet Google's back in the 140 range. It's almost back at all-time highs. So even you stated like Google's been going to zero. Not really, but you just said Google hasn't moved. And I just wrote in the chat, it's up 46% in the last year. So perception can be everything sometimes. And I think sometimes it's overdone. And I think until you have so much more consolidation and then it's obvious, then I think Rocket Lab is going to be out in an awful place. And this is why I've continued to say that Rocket Lab, from a capital exposure perspective, until you kind of get through, I've been saying this probably through the last 6 months. So I've basically been saying for the next 12 to 18 months. Well, I guess it's now for the next 6 to 12 months, until you kind of get into that first half of 2025 time period, and you're able to fully see the breadth of opportunity that's in front of it. It's going to be a very volatile market, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And even still, people approach me in the last, they're like, now is the right time. And I'm like, I mean, you could wait for a couple more signal pieces, but the thing that I'm fearful of is anybody investing today, they'll immediately be like, oh yeah, I'm not worried. It's a 10-year investment. But like you said, their nerves start to get a little freaky when they're down 20% or 25%. And I'm like, what happened to you agreeing that it's a 10-year investment?
Yeah.
Be prepared for it to go down 50%, here and there.
I wanted to post something on X, that it's so easy to be a long-term investor when your stock is going up. And, only when your stock is going against you for a long period of time, that's when you see who the real long-term investors are. And I recently got like a very big, like, I've always appreciated you, but an even more appreciation, because the fact that you're holding Rocket Lab since $10 since they de-spec'd, which is years and years ago, and you're down 50% on some of your position, and then you're more bullish on the company than ever. It's not a lot of people can do it. And now you see it on Tesla, that Tesla had a lot of retail long-term investors when the stock price was going up. And now, like, there is a period when the stock hasn't done anything for 3 years. And some of these long-term investors are very pissed and selling and are shorting the stock now because Elon is effing up. And you know, he's yeah, whatever. And I think that that's a similar, yeah, like this is when you see who are the real long-term investors and who are just tourists in the stock. And I think that we as content creators, like the lower the stock price, we are more needed to remind people like, okay, this is the thesis, you know, this is what's happening, this is why you invested. And I think sometimes it's needed. And I will be honest, like this week I had a little bit of a, like, I had to go through myself, like, okay, and you know, the minute I go through the data, I'm like, I'm so calm about this company, and yeah, but the emotions can get to you.
But you should feel that, Vince. I mean, if that's the case, and like for me, I'm okay. If this stock goes to $3.50, I'm okay. If you're feeling something like that, it might mean that you are over concentrated in two big stocks. And I'm not trying to say that to call you out, but I think that's something you need to consider.
I am, as we know that I had a mishap on options that I didn't fully close out yet. So currently, like, I would like to keep my Rocket Lab position, and but if the stock price keeps dropping, then I might have to trim to keep my margin level alive and not blow up my account.
Understandable.
But yeah, so you are very correct in your observation. So we got a question here. It's so scary how the price moves. I have 70% of my money in Rocket Lab, and lately I am scared. Maybe there is something we don't know about Rocket Lab and it performs like that, but still not selling. So yeah, it's exactly the point that I was on. Like, I think that as long as you're not on leverage, you have nothing to worry about. And I've been through similar on Palantir when I bought Palantir at $12. And you have, Matt, you have a lot more experience than me on this front. But when Palantir went from, I bought first at $12, I was super bullish. Then it went to $10. I was still super bullish. Then it went to $8. I bought more. I was still super bullish. And then when it went down to $6, I started like, okay, I started at 12. It went, am I missing something? Like, because the market is telling me I'm an effing idiot and I missed something, you know? And for me, it was like when I go through the data again and, you know, I try to poke holes in my own thesis and I'm like, no, my thesis is still standing. Then I'm like, okay, there's no way that I'm selling. And I think it's important to view it like this and not based on your emotions, because they creep in. I think it's normal.
Yeah. I mean, to give anybody some maybe confidence, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm just looking at the shares that I have at the moment, and so I have about 9,000 or so shares, and let me just look. About maybe 1,200 of those shares are actually positive, and the other, like, I don't know, 7,500 or whatever are underwater. That's okay, but it also goes back to specifically this question. I mean, if you're, I don't know if you're saying you're scared because you actually are genuinely scared, or if you are slightly scared, right? If you're actually genuinely scared, then this is why people make fun of me quite often, or they poke. Well, somebody actually the other day, they're like, why is Rocket Lab number 7 in your portfolio? Because what's that, you? It was somebody else. It was somebody else as well, right? They were like, he's got Palantir higher, Amazon, Bitcoin, like all these other things that are above. And it's like, because to me, if I lose 60 grand, I'm okay with that. Now, some of you guys in the chat might be like, if I lost 60 grand, I'd be mortified. I've lost, there's been multiple investments. Well, not multiple, really only one, which was Wish back in 2020, 2021 timeframe, where I've lost like 95% of that. And I keep it in the portfolio. I think it's over like 40 grand or something, 50 grand that I lost on that. And that's okay. I'm still here. I'm still living. Invest as much that you're willing to lose. So if that's 70% of your portfolio in Rocket Lab is more than you're willing to lose, then take that, learn from that, because you're probably down on your position, and understand that 70% of your portfolio might disappear. It's plausible. And if that's the case, and that scares you even more so by me saying that, then it's okay. It's a marathon and not a sprint, right? Nobody's going to fault you if you only have 10% of your portfolio in Rocket Lab or 5% in your portfolio. People might call you out, but like Vince might call me out and say, why do you only have, Rocket Lab is number 7 in your portfolio? And it's like, because I'm okay if it goes from 60 grand to 0. Like, that's okay with me. Am I okay losing 100 grand? Probably not. And that's why I'm okay with Palantir being over $100,000 in my portfolio right now, because it's profitable at this point. It's not as much of a risk, right? I don't see it going to 0. If anything, if there's a possibility that I could see it turning course or something like that, and at that point it might lose some of its value, but the stock's not going to 0. This is one of those things that at the moment is still binary. And if you have 70% of your portfolio in there and you're fearful of losing 70% of your net worth in this respect, it goes back to what I stated to Vince earlier. It's okay to add a different stock or add the S&P 500, as a stability point in your portfolio, because once that 70% goes to 0, it's gone. Like, it's going to be much harder for you to make that up than, if you just play the game slow, so I know that's not probably the verbiage you want to hear, but that's not like Rocket Lab advice. This is general advice. I see a lot of people that over concentrate into things and knock themselves out, and they lose interest in the market forever. And sometimes people never learn. Sometimes, I would say that 90% of people, 95% of the people that are probably in this chat even, should probably just invest in the S&P 500 and not look at an individual stock. Now, I'm a huge believer of Rocket Lab, which is why I don't know what size my position is, but it's a little bit less than, I guess, 5% right now. It's going to be closer to 5%, I guess, by the end of the month, because I'm going to be put a lot of shares, like 4,000 shares in the next couple of weeks, which I'm okay with. But, you have to recognize, and I can't tell you, if you're comfortable with that 70% of your money being in a single stock or not. But if you're genuinely scared, just double check yourself.
Yeah, wise words. I mean, I don't think Rocket Lab is going to 0, but definitely there is a risk that we might go sideways, or we might go to unrealistically low prices and stay there for a little bit. So that's why I think that the real danger is your emotions and margin. And if you're not with, like, you don't have to put up with that. Like, sometimes it's not worth to lose sleep over these things. So you can always hedge by put options. If you want to keep the position, you can trim the position, but I think it's better to, if you want to keep the position, to steel yourself to the thought that we might be here for an extended period of time, and if you're not okay with that, then it's not the correct stock for you.
Yeah. And to iterate, I can't determine if that 70% is enough for you, right? 70% is too much for me. I mean, let's just be blunt. I think we know that I do okay, and that would mean that I have if I were to do 70%, that would mean I have close to 7 figures within Rocket Lab. I personally, while I wish I could say that, I would be comfortable with that, because I think that that point would, walking out in 10 years time, I would have 8 figures instead of, what I have now. But I'm not okay personally with that. If you are, and you go to, if you check yourself and you do your little Zen moment, you meditate for a little bit and you say, I'm okay with the upside of that 70%. Let's just say it's $100,000. You're like, well, I honestly think it's going to turn to 1.5. I could lose 100 and be upset with myself forever, but I'd even be more upset with myself if I said divested 50% of it and only had 50,000, and instead of 1.5, I only ended up with $500,000 or 400 grand or whatever. You're like, one is life-changing money. One is maybe you're in the same spot you are today. Like, I was having this conversation with my buddy. He's like, oh man, I can't wait for Rocket Lab to moon. I'm like, dude, you have 200 shares. You have no fucking money in the goddamn stock. Like, even if it goes up like 10x I was like, you're going to have $4,000. I'm like, that's not going to do anything for you. So you have to play this game of like, what's too much, what's too little. And that's not just with Rocket Lab. That's just in general, right? I mean, a lot of people put money in to the stock market and be like, oh man, they got all excited about $1,000. It's like, you're fucking broke. Like, I hate to say, like, I don't want to be mean. We all start at zero, right? And so I commend anybody that gets invested. That's a huge step. But putting $1,000 is in, like, even if it goes up, like there was a story, and I think I said this last week, of somebody putting like $1,000 or $10,000 into Amazon. It went to like 1.7 million or something like that. $10,000 into 1.7 million if you invested on the day that Amazon went IPO. It's like, well, shit. Even that, you'd be like, you have people that put $1,000 in, they think they're going to become the next Warren Buffett. It's like, that's not how this goes, right? You have to continually harvest and grow and farm into the portfolio. You can't just put $10,000 in. Even in the best stock, one of the best returning stocks of all time, you put $10,000 in, you only ended up with 1.7 million. So this goes to show you that, like, you kind of have to play the middleman between what's too little and what's too much.
Yeah. And if you're worried about Rocket Lab, remember the CEO is a dishwasher engineer, 0 qualifications in the Rocket Lab industry, who rode a donkey, and it was a tough ride for him. So I hope that makes you sleep well. Cool. In closing, I think this was a good episode, and yeah, like of course, like, people don't want to hear this, but there is risk, and we want to be transparent about that. And yeah, this is not just go bullish, sell your house, and be 100% Rocket Lab. Like, we're transparent with what is at stake and with what we are doing. So what do you think are because so the S&P 500 is probably getting a pullback. Maybe next week the Fed is going to announce that there's going to be less rate cuts than the market expects. We don't know if they will announce that or not. That will not be positive, and so we see a lot of like negatives looming. What do you think are positive catalysts that could happen to the stock in the near future?
Positive catalysts, I mean, the Archimedes testing, that's pretty much all. I mean, there's the tank testing and stuff like that, but I think Archimedes is really the big thing, the big item that's going to be, like, if that's not done by the 1Q earnings report in May, I think it's early May, maybe it's mid-May, but if that's not done by then, so we have about 2 months time period, there's going to be a lot of questions specifically around, are we going to be able to meet the December launch deadline that we kind of set ourselves? But I also want to state, and I'll hand it back to you, I don't think that I know I'm being harsh with my terminology about, like, don't put too much, blah, 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 put what you can lose. I don't think it's a coin flip, right? Rocket Lab, I think that means it's 50-50. Definitely not 50-50. There's less than a 5% chance, I think, of this company going bankrupt. I have a lot of conviction in this company. So I don't want to make people think that I'm like, oh, it's I did say it's positive or negative, right? That makes it seem 50-50. There's only 2 choices. I don't agree with that. I give a downside scenario of 5%. The upside opportunity on this is heavily outweighed. So for anybody that is maybe has too much of a position or they're concerned, I think you should be okay. I think that this company is well financialized, so don't be too concerned in that respect. Back
awesome.
To you,
I think that you can also have, because there is the NSSL Trench 3 lane 1 or 2. I don't remember which one they're in. I think that one should be announced in April, if I remember well, and that would be quite a big contract. That possibly, if they can keep the neutron timeline, and if this office who decides this, they judge that Rocket Lab had a credible timeline to launch back in December when they put in the bid, that could be a big catalyst. I think they can announce new contract anytime, which can also be a big catalyst. And yes, the hot fire test, which I'm pretty sure I would be very surprised if it didn't happen, because I mean, the CFO said that we're so close and we see that we feel confident enough to announce it, that it will be end of March, beginning April. Peter Beck said something very similar on the earnings call. But yes, like if that hot fire test wouldn't happen until May, that would have some serious ramifications, I believe, for the stock.
Yeah. I think the thing that bothers me though is these catalysts will be short-lived until we truly get to a place where we are cash flow positive.
Yeah.
Or maybe not cash flow positive, but at least profit positive, EBITDA positive, and not what's what I'm trying to say. But as long as we're not burning cash anymore, right? So we're actually generating positive EBITDA, right, for the company. And until that happens, I think it's going to be tough. Because our EBITDA margins are getting there, but when it comes to operating losses and stuff like that, we're still hemorrhaging a lot of cash on a quarterly basis. So anything like a rocket fire test or engine test, or any additional contracts, you might see a short buzz in the stock, but you won't see the fundamental base or like the floor price of the stock truly increase until we get to a place where I think you either have Neutron on the pad and are testing it and it's guaranteed, or you get to a place where you're actually generating cash back into the business.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that is weird with this stock is that we can run on no news. Like if you if you look at, for example, the period of last November, December, when we went from like 4 to like almost 7. Sorry, from May to July, that we ran to like almost 750. It wasn't any like announcements, and so we can just run. But as you said, like we came back to the floor. So yeah, very volatile stock. We have to, as long as you're buying at this level, I think you're very, very safe, because yeah, you're buying at a very established support level and near all-time lows. So a lot of the risk is taken out.
Yeah, I think if you think about it in this perspective, the average volume of the company is less than 10 million shares a day. So if you think about it in that perspective, you're trading about $30 million worth of shares a day, and the company's worth, let's just say, $2 billion. I mean, you're trading like 1%, 1.5% of the float a day. So if you have somebody that's actually genuinely entering, like a hedge fund or something like that, where somebody's genuinely taking a large interest in the organization, it doesn't take much to move the stock. Because if you think about it, it's not like you're selling 100 million shares a day or something like that, right? If somebody wants to pile in, they're going to be buying, let's say, thousands upon thousands of shares. It's going to cause a lot of depletion of overall available shares that generally get traded on a day-to-day basis. So anyway, just some food for thought. So it doesn't take much for the stock to go in the right direction, but will it stay there, I guess, is the question.
Cool. I really enjoyed this week. Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone that was here in the chat. And hopefully next week is going to be better, but be ready to experience anything when it comes to this stock. So thank you so much, guys. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. You have all of Matt's data in the description box below. And see you guys next week.
Thank you all.
Matt, do you want to stay a bit after?
Sure.
All right.